Welcome to Legacy Black Power. 23 Black R&B stars who tragically died of AIDS. The stage lights once blazed for them. The music once carried their souls across the world. But behind the fame, a silent killer was waiting. AIDS didn't just steal lives. It stole legends, silenced voices, and cut short the brilliance of 23 Black R&B stars who gave everything to their art. Tonight, we uncover their stories. The rise, the glory, and the heartbreaking fall. These are not just names in history. They are reminders of how fragile even the brightest lights can be. Stay with us. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. Sylvester, disco's glittering god, didn't just step onto the stage. He exploded onto it like a firestorm of freedom. Born Sylvester James Jr., he rose from the church pews of Los Angeles and transformed into one of the most flamboyant and unapologetic icons of the 1970s. With falsetto so piercing it could shatter glass and melt hearts, he redefined what it meant to be mighty real. San Francisco's nightclub shook under his anthems, but behind the sequins and spotlight was a man living on the razor's edge between ecstasy and oblivion. The 1980s in San Francisco were a fevered dream. Lust, liberation, and danger. Sylvester dove headfirst into that chaos. Nights soaked in cocaine, hard liquor, and strangers' arms. Some nights, he'd vanish with half a dozen lovers, chasing highs to silence the ache inside. In 1982, he boldly proclaimed, "Sex is freedom," but freedom came at a price. HIV had already begun its silent invasion. By 1985, the mirror betrayed him. Cheeks hollowed, weight vanishing, sores creeping across his skin. The once mighty voice that ruled dance floors trembled to a whisper. Doctors gave it to him straight. "You're running out of time." The collapse came quickly. In March 1987, Sylvester crumpled mid-performance, the spotlight now exposing a ghost of his former glory. By summer, his legs were paralyzed. Kaposi sarcoma marbled his skin, his strength dissolved, and his Castro home, once alive with laughter and music, became a hushed sanctuary of antiseptic and fading hope. As his body withered, so did the world around him. Friends drifted, lovers vanished, reporters forgot. Even lips that once kissed him now turned away. By his final days, the disco king was a frail shadow, trembling in a hospital bed, barely 105 pounds. And yet he held on. One last act. One last Christmas. On December 16, 1988, at 4:10 a.m., Sylvester's heart surrendered. The room was quiet. Only Joanne, his dearest friend, held his hand as the light left his eyes. No applause, no thunder, just silence. But Sylvester never left quietly. In death, he delivered his boldest encore. He left every dollar of his royalties, not to family, not to fair-weather friends, but to AIDS organizations serving Black communities. He wanted the world to hear what others tried to silence. AIDS was not just a gay thing. It was a human crisis. Sylvester died of AIDS, but not without purpose. His final legacy screamed louder than any disco anthem. I lived. I loved. I mattered. Even if the world forgot his music and his defiance, never will. Bobby DeBarge. Bobby DeBarge wasn't just another singer. He was a phenomenon, a funk genius. A man with falsetto so angelic, it could stop you in your tracks, and looks that made him the heartthrob of Switch, the band that set dance floors on fire in the late 70s. He wasn't only performing music. He was shaping a legacy for the entire DeBarge family dynasty. But while the world saw stardom, inside, Bobby was unraveling. By 1981, as Switch soared to the top, Bobby spiraled to the bottom. Wild nights, endless parties, pills, ecstasy, and a devastating heroin addiction that cost him $3,000 a week. He wasn't experimenting. He was drowning. The man who once lit up every stage was now just a flicker, kept alive by adrenaline and desperation. In 1988, the collapse came. Police sirens, cold handcuffs, a prison cell. No more screaming fans, just silence, sickness, and shame. Behind bars, Bobby wasted away, nearly 40 pounds gone, coughing blood, his skin ghostly pale. When he finally walked free in 1993, the freedom came with a death sentence. Doctors told him he was HIV positive. Whether it came from years of risky choices or from prison itself, no one could say. Bobby never spoke about it. The virus was relentless. By 1994, hepatitis ravaged his body. A year later, his immune system collapsed. CMV pneumonia shredded his lungs. Every breath became a battle. Nurses changed sweat-drenched sheets while Bobby, once a dazzling star, lay fragile, hollow, and fading. On August 16, 1995, at exactly 3:27 a.m., Bobby DeBarge took his final breath. He weighed just 99 pounds. His hair was gone, his skin covered in sores. AIDS had claimed him. There were no cameras, no encore, no spotlight. Just quiet sobs from family who loved him and fans who would never forget him. Bobby DeBarge left the world far too soon. Not just a fallen star, but a haunting reminder of brilliance consumed by pain, addiction, and tragedy. His music remains, but so does the aching question, what might have been? Kenny Green. Kenny Green was more than just a singer. He was an R&B genius. His voice floated like silk. His pen carved timeless records like Love No Limit from Mary J. Blige. And as a frontman of Intro, he helped define the very sound of the 90s. He was the kind of talent who didn't just perform songs. He lived them, breathed them, made you feel them. But behind the velvet voice and chart-topping hits was a man slowly slipping into silence. One day, Kenny was everywhere, his face on album covers, his name in the credits, his voice on the radio. Then, almost overnight, he was gone, and when he returned, it was in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. By the late 90s, the industry that once embraced him had faded into smoke-filled clubs and fleeting nights. Love came without limits, boundaries blurred, and fear had no place in the room. No one knows exactly when or how Kenny contracted HIV. But by 1999, the transformation was impossible to ignore. His skin darkened, his frame wasted, his once bright eyes hollowed by a disease that refused to let go. Blood tests told the truth no one wanted to face. His viral load skyrocketed. His CD4 count collapsed. The diagnosis was clear. It wasn't just HIV. It was full-blown AIDS. From there, his life became a battle he couldn't win. By 2000, hospitals replaced studios. Microphones were traded for 4 drips. He fought through pneumonia, thrush, relentless fevers, and pain so cruel it stripped away the very essence of who he was. Cytomegalovirus stole his vision. His voice, the instrument that gave life to so many, was silenced by a body too frail to keep up. In his final months, the ICU became his last stage. Machines blinked where once spotlights had shined. On October 1st, 2001, at 3:42 p.m., Kenny Green breathed his last. He was just 95 pounds. His CD4 count, a mere 49. There were no roaring crowds, no family by his side, only nurses who gently pulled a sheet over the man who had once filled arenas with sound. His bandmates came too late, left only with the image of him behind glass. Kenny Green gave the world love through music, raw, powerful, unforgettable love. But in the end, it was a love lived without protection that stole his tomorrow. Ronnie Dyson, the angelic tenor who once soared across the airwaves of the 1970s, died alone, forgotten, his heart failing under the cruel weight of AIDS. He was once a golden voice of soul, electrifying Broadway with his breakout in Hair and melting hearts with his chart-topping ballad, Why Can't I Touch You? His sound was velvet, pure and aching with longing, a voice that promised hope. But fame, as always, is fleeting, and behind the applause, shadows were already closing in. By the early 80s, the lights dimmed, the call stopped, record deals vanished. The grand stages where audiences once screamed his name now stood silent. With nowhere else to go, Ronnie left New York for Philadelphia, searching for peace, but what he found was loneliness. In a crumbling apartment on a rough street, the once celebrated star faded into obscurity. Heroin became his refuge. Each needle numbed the ache of being forgotten. Friends drifted away. Precaution gave way to despair. By 1985, a cough stained with blood told a darker truth. The diagnosis was merciless, HIV positive, with his lungs collapsing around him. He had no insurance, no savings, no family by his side. The voice that once carried a generation could now barely whisper in the night. By 1990, Ronnie was a shadow of himself, gaunt, skeletal, weighing just 101 pounds, his body ravaged by infections. The glittering sequins he once wore under stage lights were replaced by thin sheets in a darkened room. On November 10th, at 1:35 a.m., Ronnie Dyson took his final breath. No cameras, no headlines. His body lay undiscovered for nearly 9 hours. There was no funeral, no tribute, just silence. Only years later did the truth surface quietly. AIDS had claimed him, but the world barely noticed. One of soul music's brightest flames had been extinguished without a sound. No standing ovation, no encore, just a haunting reminder of how quickly fame forgets. Even the voices that once made it sing. Jermaine Stewart, the R&B star who danced through the darkness. In the neon glow of the 1980s, Jermaine Stewart was unstoppable, a storm of rhythm and style that electrified the R&B scene. With his smash hit, "We Don't Ever Take Our Clothes Off," he flipped the script on sensuality. He didn't sell desire with skin. He sold it with elegance, wit, and a voice smoother than silk. On stage, he was fearless, a symbol of confidence, charisma, and pure magic. But when the spotlights faded, a different story unfolded, one steeped in shadows. By 1986, the bright lights of Chicago's nightlife began to swallow him whole. Behind velvet ropes and pounding bass lines, Jermaine drifted into a world of endless parties, cocaine highs, and reckless encounters. In those euphoric nights, protection seemed unnecessary. But somewhere in a blur, something invisible took hold. HIV, silent and merciless. The signs came quickly. His body wasted away, dropping from 150 to 119 pounds in just 5 months. His skin yellowed, his urine turned dark. Still, Jermaine said nothing. He canceled shows, abandoned an unfinished album, and retreated into silence. The press forgot him. The fans moved on. By 1991, the truth could no longer hide. A close friend discovered what Jermaine had fought to conceal. AIDS was destroying him. Soon after, he vanished completely, locking himself away in a crumbling Chicago apartment. No more music, no visitors, just pain, just silence. Then came the final blow. In 1996, doctors delivered a death sentence, late-stage liver cancer. With no money, no insurance, hospitals turned him away. Each day became torture, vomiting blood, searing fevers, seizures ripping through his fragile body. Once a dazzling star, Jermaine withered to just 92 pounds. His eyes bulged, his heart faltered, his body, once built for dance, became a battlefield of suffering. At 3:42 a.m. on March 17, 1997, Jermaine Stewart took his final breath. Alone in a freezing room, his body lay undiscovered for nearly 15 hours. By the time the morgue arrived, there was no ceremony, no dignity. Friends came too late. Family barely lingered. No grand funeral. No tributes. Just silence. Eerily echoing the silence he lived in during his last years. Jermaine once sang of innocence, joy, and love without shame. But in the end, his death mirrored society's treatment of his illness, isolated, ignored, and cast aside. And yet his music remains. A reminder of the man who dared to sing about love with dignity, even as the world turned its back on him. Roderick "Pooh" Clark wasn't just another singer in the 90s. He was a heartbeat of R&B. With his smooth looks and velvet voice, he helped High Five soar to fame with the hit "I Like the Way," "The Kissing Game." To fans, he had it all: talent, youth, and a smile that could light up a stage. But behind that glow was a story destined to break hearts. In 1992, fate struck hard. After a late-night performance, Pooh's car spun out in a violent crash. Rushed into emergency surgery, he hovered between life and death as doctors pumped 5 liters of blood into his body. He survived, but hidden in one of those transfusions was something no one saw coming. The blood supply, inadequately screened at the time, was tainted with HIV. In that single night, tragedy silently entered his body. For years, Pooh carried on as if untouched. He smiled for cameras, sang for packed crowds, and lived like he was invincible. But behind the curtain, HIV was dismantling him piece by piece. And then, as if one cruel twist was enough, another came. In 1996, on a rainy Texas highway, his car skidded and slammed into a guardrail. This time, the outcome was even harsher. His neck was broken. Paralysis stole his freedom, leaving him trapped in a wheelchair, dependent on machines just to breathe and eat. By 2002, his immune system was nearly gone. His CD4 count plummeted to a dangerous 58. Then came the final blow. A deadly fungal infection invaded his lungs. Fever burned through his frail body as he gasped for air. And in the quiet hours of April 14th, at exactly 2:37 a.m., Roderick Pooh Clark slipped away. The official report read, Pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia, history of AIDS. He was only 31, once a vibrant star who filled arenas. He died weighing less than 100 pounds, a shadow of the man fans remembered. His life was stolen by a string of cruel tragedies, a contaminated blood bag, a freak accident, and an unforgiving virus. Pooh Clark's story is not just about fame lost. It's a haunting reminder how fragile life is, how quickly the dream can turn into a nightmare, and why his name should never be forgotten. Orish Grinstead, a golden voice silenced too soon. The hospital room was dark, almost silent, except for the hiss of machines. In those final moments, a light that once electrified the music world flickered out. Orish Grinstead, the angelic voice behind the R&B sensation 702, lay weak, swollen, and breathless. Her kidneys were failing, her body ravaged by AIDS-related complications. She was only 29. A decade earlier, the world had known her differently. It was 1999, and Where My Girl's At was everywhere, blasting through car radios, dominating MTV, shaping the sound of an era. At just 19, Orish was the face of youth, beauty, and power in an industry dominated by men. She had it all: the voice, the look, the fire. She was destined for greatness. But behind the glamour, her story veered into heartbreak. When 702 went on hiatus, Orish drifted into the arms of an older, wealthy Las Vegas mogul. He was charming, connected, seemingly untouchable, but he carried a secret that would destroy her life. For 3 years, she trusted him blindly, no questions, no tests. And without warning, HIV invaded her body. She didn't know. She couldn't fight what she couldn't see. By 2006, the warning signs came. Her nails turned gray. Her energy vanished. Long nights of sickness blurred into weeks. The diagnosis hit like a thunderbolt. HIV positive. CD4 count under 200. Her immune system was collapsing. And unlike megastars with resources, Orish was alone. No label. No insurance. No access to the life-saving drugs that could have kept her alive. Dialysis was agony. Every night, she vomited into hospital sheets, her body breaking down while the industry she once lit up moved on without her. The mirror told the truth. The radiant girl the world once adored was gone. Her calls stopped being returned. Friends stopped visiting. Fame had forgotten her. On April 20th, 2008, at 5:12 a.m., her body gave out. Her lungs filled with fluid. Her blood pressure collapsed. Doctors shocked her heart 3 times, but the fight was over. She died with her eyes wide open, as if even her body couldn't accept the end. Orish Grinstead's death wasn't just another tragic headline. It was a warning, a devastating reminder of how blind trust, silence, and abandonment can steal even the brightest voices. She was more than a statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, an artist who deserved more than to fade away in silence. Willie Beaver Hale, the guitar that sang until the silence took him. He wasn't just a guitarist. He was a spellcaster. Every riff, every lick from Willie Hale's hands carried the soul of an era. His guitar didn't just play music. It told secrets. It healed wounds. It painted feelings too heavy for words. From Curtis Mayfield to Millie Jackson and Betty Wright, his sound lived in the background of greatness. But while the music soared, Willie's life was slipping into the shadows. In the early 80s, Los Angeles seemed like the promised land. Fame lights endless nights. But with the glamour came the poison. Parties bled into mornings. Bottles never emptied. Needles passed from hand to hand. The man whose guitar once bled soul began bleeding his own life away. And in those shadows, a silent killer crept in, HIV. No headlines, no warnings, just a thief waiting for its moment. By 1986, it hit like lightning. Willie shed 40 pounds in 3 months. His skin erupted in angry rashes. His hair fell away in handfuls. His mouth blistered until even speaking burned. Yet he told no one. Shame was louder than the disease. He still took his guitar dim clubs along Venice Beach, coughing between chords, spitting blood after songs, begging the music to stay in his hands just a little longer. On August 27th, 1987, the music stopped. Nurses found him in a hospital bed, weighing only 92 pounds. His lungs destroyed, his body consumed by AIDS. But the world never knew. No obituaries, no tributes, no headlines. Just silence. Years later, whispers from friends revealed the truth. Willie Beaver Hale, the soul behind so many timeless melodies, was lost not to time, not to obscurity, but to a needle and the crushing silence of stigma. Calvin Yarbrough, eyes that carried the weight of silent suffering. Once, he was pure soul magic, a voice that poured out velvet notes on timeless tracks like I'm Back for More. With his partner Al, the duo Al and Cal became the heartbeat of a generation. But as so many legends have learned, fame always sends a bill, and for Calvin, the price was devastating. By the mid-'80s, the man whose voice once melted hearts was fading into a shadow. The smile was still there, but behind it lived exhaustion, loneliness, and a hunger that no applause could ever fill. Nights blurred into wild parties, bottles drained, powder lined, and fleeting faces that vanished by dawn. The music that once saved him now couldn't reach him. His body, once strong, once vibrant, began to unravel under the weight of excess and despair. And then came the invisible killer. AIDS, still mysterious, still whispered about, was silently cutting its way across the world. Calvin had no idea death had already crept into his bloodstream. By 1986, his body was sending warnings, burning fevers, violent coughs, skin stretched thin like parchment. He brushed it off as the flu. So he pressed on, stepping onto stages with a smile, forcing his voice to rise above the decay. But inside, he was dying. By late 1987, that golden voice was gone. Hospitalized, frail, and barely recognizable, the truth could no longer be denied. HIV-related pneumonia. And with it came something almost worse than the illness, the crushing stigma. Back then, AIDS didn't just kill, it erased you. It branded you with shame. On December 15th, 1987, Calvin Yarbrough drew his last breath in a cold hospital room. No family at his side. No friends holding his hand. Just silence. Just tears that nobody saw. There was no grand funeral. The world was too afraid. Even in death, AIDS made him invisible. And yet, months later, when I'm Back for More was re-released, something changed. Fans listened again, not just to the sweetness in his voice, but to the sorrow behind it. Every note felt like a wound. Every lyric like a confession. It was no longer just a love song. It was a cry from a soul that gave everything until nothing remained. And those wounds, they still echo. They've never healed. Wayne Cooper, the funk star silence in the shadows. He was a soaring falsetto that gave Cameo its fire, the voice that could turn a packed dance floor into pure electricity. With songs like Find My Way, Wayne Cooper didn't just sing. He lifted souls, commanded hearts, and made the night feel endless. For a moment, it seemed nothing could dim his shine. But behind the blinding lights and screaming fans lurked a darkness few dared to acknowledge. Wayne lived on the edge. Nights blurred into smoke-filled rooms, endless bottles, drugs that promised escape, and loves that never lasted. It wasn't just a cliche of a rock star's life. It was a slow, merciless descent. His drug use was constant, and with it came a silent predator, HIV. In the early 1980s, the world barely spoke its name, and the stigma was heavier than the disease itself. By 1983, The changes were undeniable. The once vibrant showman began to fade, his body weakened, his energy drained. Fevers, weight loss, lesions that scarred his smile. Doctors gave him the devastating truth. HIV was consuming him. But fear of whispers, rejection, of being branded, kept him silent. Even those closest to him never knew the battle he fought behind closed doors. On stage, every performance became a war against time. His falsetto still soared, but now it carried desperation, as if he knew each note might be his last. Fans saw brilliance. Behind the curtain, he was gasping for air, pale, his eyes distant, haunted. And then on October 15th, 1984, Wayne Cooper's voice was silenced forever. He died in an Atlanta hospital, only 28 years old, from AIDS-related complications. There were no headlines, no tributes, no tearful farewells. Cameo said nothing. The media looked away. His death, like so many others in that brutal era, was buried in silence. Only years later did the whispers surface that another bright star of funk had been stolen, not just by a disease, but by a world too ashamed to face it. Wayne Cooper was more than a voice. He was a spark, a spirit, a reminder of the cost of silence. His story isn't just about loss. It's about the countless voices never given the farewell they deserved. David Cole, the silent tragedy behind the spotlight. He made the world dance. David Cole, the brilliant architect behind C+C Music Factory, was a man who gave the 90s its heartbeat. His sound shook nightclubs from New York to Tokyo. His beats pulsed through radios, stadiums, and headphones, an unstoppable force of rhythm and joy. On stage, he was untouchable. To fans, he was a genius at the height of his power. But behind the flashing lights, behind the screams of sold-out crowds, a quiet tragedy was taking root. David lived fast, drawn into the whirlwind of fame, late nights, and fleeting pleasures. And in that reckless freedom, something invisible and merciless found him. HIV crept into his life like a thief in the dark. The world didn't talk about it then. AIDS carried a stigma so heavy that most suffered in silence. David never spoke of it. He kept smiling. He kept creating. He kept giving the world music that made it feel alive, even as the disease was quietly stealing his own strength. And then, suddenly it was over. January 24th, 1995. Alone in New York City, David Cole's brilliant flame went out. No farewell tour. No last encore. Just silence. The official cause, complications from AIDS. The shock rippled through the industry. The man who made millions move was gone at only 32. His death wasn't just a loss of a visionary musician. It was a chilling reminder of how many lives were being lost in silence. David Cole's story is more than music history. It's a haunting chapter of the 90s, a moment that forces us to remember the cost of stigma, the fragility of life, and the genius of man who gave everything to the world but left too soon. Easy, the legend who died too fast, too young. Eric, Easy, Wright wasn't just a rapper. He was a heartbeat of a revolution. The mastermind behind NWA. He didn't just rap about rebellion. He embodied it, raw, loud, and fearless. To the world, Easy was untouchable, a street king who lived on his own terms. But fate had a cruel twist waiting. In February 1995, Easy's body betrayed him. The coughing wouldn't stop, his chest burned, and every breath felt like a battle. At first, doctors brushed it off as a flu. But then came the blow no one saw coming. Easy was HIV positive. Just weeks later, on March 26th, he was gone, only 31 years old. His death hit like an earthquake. Fans, friends, the entire hip-hop community, stunned. Death didn't whisper. It kicked down the door without mercy. But in his final days, Easy made a choice that turned tragedy into legacy. He went public. In the mid-90s, AIDS was a word most artists wouldn't dare speak. Shame, silence, and stigma surrounded it. Yet Easy shattered that silence. His confession forced millions to face a reality they wanted to ignore. Eazy's passing wasn't just a fall of a legend. It was a wake-up call. His music gave voice to the streets, but his death gave voice to something even greater. Truth. He reminded the world that even icons bleed, even kings can fall, And even legends aren't invincible. Easy didn't just leave behind hits. He left behind a warning, a legacy, and a story that still echoes through hip-hop history. Big Pun. Christopher Lee Rios, better known to the world as Big Pun, wasn't just another rapper. He was a lyrical hurricane, a heavyweight voice in East Coast hip-hop whose rhyme scheme shattered barriers and set a new standard for the game. In 1998, with his debut album Capital Punishment, he etched his name into history as the first solo Latino rapper to go platinum, a crown that placed him among rap's untouchable royalty. His flow was lightning, his presence commanding, his future limitless. But behind the thunder's applause and the platinum plaques, another story was unfolding. Away from the mic, Pun was fighting demons that no beat could drown out. Addiction, drug use, and a lifestyle spinning out of control began to chip away at the man behind the legend. By the late 90s, his health was deteriorating at a frightening pace. Weighing over 440 pounds, Pun's body was buckling under the pressure. Heart problems mounted, illnesses came in waves, and even his larger-than-life persona couldn't hide the toll. Then came February 7th, 2000, the day hip-hop lost one of its brightest flames. Big Pun collapsed suddenly, and doctors couldn't bring him back. He was just 28 years old. It was a gut punch to the culture. A giant was gone. His voice, his power, his promise, silenced far too soon. And yet, in every verse that still blares through speakers, in every young Latino artist who dares to dream, Big Pun lives on. His legacy isn't just remembered, it's immortal. Bernard Edwards, when the music died in silence. Bernard Edwards Jr., the legendary bassist and co-founder Chic, wasn't just a musician. He was a heartbeat of funk and disco. His bass lines didn't just anchor songs. They defined a generation, fueling timeless anthems that still fill dance floors around the world. Yet, while the world swayed to his grooves, a darker rhythm was pulsing beneath the surface. By the late 90s, just as Chic was preparing for a long-awaited comeback, Bernard faced a battle no stage lights could hide. The hard-living lifestyle of endless tours, whirlwind romances, and late-night parties had left its scars. HIV, the silent killer of a generation, had found him. And yet, Bernard never let the world see his weakness. He performed with the same unmatched fire, pouring out every ounce of strength as if each show might be his last. Behind that bass guitar, he gave everything he had left, masking the toll the disease was quietly taking. But on April 18, 1996, in a hotel room in Tokyo, the music stopped. Pneumonia, driven by immune collapse, claimed him in his sleep. No farewell tour, no final encore, just silence. Bernard Edwards' death wasn't just a loss of a legend. It was a quiet heartbreak, another brilliant voice stolen too soon by a merciless epidemic. His story remains a haunting reminder. The rhythm may live on, but the man who gave it to us was silenced far too soon. The cruel end of Afrobeat's fierce rebel, Fela Kuti. Fela Kuti was never just a man with a microphone. He was a firestorm, the father of Afrobeat. He turned music into a weapon, his voice slicing through corruption and oppression with unrelenting fury. Every beat of his drum, every blast of his saxophone, carried a heartbeat of resistance. On stage, he was untouchable, a rebel cloaked in rhythm. Off stage, though, his life burned fast and dangerously, fueled by endless tours, fleeting affairs, and a defiance that knew no limits. But even warriors have blind spots. In Nigeria during the late 1980s, when the world was only beginning to understand the terrifying shadow of HIV and AIDS, Fela lived unaware that his own body had become its battlefield. For years, he carried on as if nothing could break him, pouring his soul into marathon performances, electrifying crowds while the virus slowly consumed him from within. By the time the truth could no longer be hidden, the disease had already won. On August 2nd, 1997, in Lagos, the fierce rebel fell. Fela Kuti died in unbearable pain, leaving behind not just silence, but a seismic void. Yet death cannot silence his roar. His music still rages, unapologetic, unbroken, eternal. Fela wasn't just an artist. He was a warrior who dared to fight with sound, and his legacy will echo for generations to come. Melvin Lindsay, the quiet storm hero who faded too soon. Melvin Lindsay wasn't just spinning records. He was crafting an atmosphere. His creation, The Quiet Storm, wasn't merely a radio format. It was a movement. Night after night, his velvet-smooth voice flowed through speakers like silk, setting the tone for love, reflection, and late-night intimacy. For countless listeners across America, Melvin wasn't a DJ. He was a companion, a storyteller, the soundtrack to their most private moments. But behind the soothing melodies and starlit radio hours, a darker rhythm was building. The 1980s brought Melvin not only fame, but also the temptations of the fast life. Endless parties, fleeting romances, and choices that carried hidden costs. Somewhere in that blur, he unknowingly contracted HIV. Silent, invisible, waiting. As the disease advanced, the transformation was devastating. The once vibrant man with effortless charisma watched his body weaken, his reflection grow unfamiliar. The voice that had soothed millions, steady, passionate, unforgettable, grew quiet. On March 26, 1992, at just 36 years old, Melvin Lindsay's voice fell silent forever. Gone far too soon, he left behind a legacy that reshaped radio, inspired generations of broadcasters, and carved a permanent place in the history of R&B. Yet his story carries a haunting note, the reminder of what more he could have given, had life played him a gentler tune. Gil Scott-Heron, the revolutionary voice that faded too soon. He wasn't just a musician, he was a movement. Gil Scott-Heron, the man who turned rage into rhythm, gave the voiceless a thunderous microphone. With searing anthems like The Bottle and Home Is Where the Hatred Is, he carved poetry into protest and laid the foundation for hip-hop, spoken word, and neo-soul. His voice shook systems. His words sparked revolutions. But while the world heard defiance, it rarely saw the man behind the microphone. Behind the brilliance was a soul unraveling, fighting demons the spotlight could never cure. On May 27, 2011, the revolution's voice fell silent. The world was told pneumonia ended his life, but those closest to him whispered a heavier truth. Gil had been living with AIDS, a silent war that hollowed out his strength long before the curtain closed. Addiction had already stripped pieces of him away, and by the time the full story surfaced, it was too late. He fought with words, but his greatest enemy was invisible, relentless, and merciless. His death was not just the end of man. It was the cost of carrying the world's pain inside your chest, of bleeding every truth into your lyrics until there's nothing left. Gil Scott-Heron left us more than music. He left us a legacy of resistance, resilience, and a haunting reminder. Even revolutionaries bleed, and even the strongest voices can fade too soon. Essex Hemphill, a rebel's light, silenced too soon. He lived with a voice that refused to whisper. Essex Hemphill loved loudly, laughed defiantly, and wrote poetry like fire, searing, untamed, impossible to ignore. In the Black queer arts movement, where silence had long been demanded, he carved a space with words sharp enough to cut through centuries of erasure. Yet on November 4th, 1995, that flame was snuffed out, and the world barely blinked. Born into a country that dismisses truth, Essex transformed rejection into art. His poems pulsed with hunger, for freedom, for intimacy, for a place to belong. Every line he wrote was a declaration of existence, a battle cry against invisibility, and a love letter to those cast into the shadows. But when the lights dimmed, Essex's own search for acceptance led him into fleeting arms, restless nights, and dangerous escapes. Then came the epidemic, the silent killer of his generation, AIDS. It crept in mercilessly, stripping away his strength, dimming his once commanding voice. Still he fought, still he wrote, but courage could not outrun the virus. And in a quiet room in Philadelphia, Essex Hemphill breathed his last breath. There were no parades, no headlines, no monuments to the brilliance of his art, just the cold silence of society that never truly embraced him. Essex died the way he often lived, unflinchingly honest, unapologetically himself, and yet heartbreakingly unseen. Frankie Knuckles. Frankie Knuckles wasn't just a DJ. He was the architect of a movement, the man the world would come call the godfather of house music, with pulsating beats and hypnotic rhythms. He transformed forgotten warehouses on Chicago's South Side into sanctuaries of freedom. Those nights weren't just parties. They were revolutions on the dance floor, where strangers became family and music became salvation. From the underground heat of sweaty basements to the flashing lights of clubs across Europe, Frankie's sound ignited a global fire. But behind the thunder of bass and euphoria of his crowds, a quieter battle raged. Frankie carried a secret, the weight of HIV. Years of late nights, endless sets, and fleeting romances masked a struggle that grew heavier with time. Complications from diabetes and AIDS began to chip away at the man whose music once felt immortal. On March 31st, 2014, Frankie Knuckles slipped away quietly in his Chicago home. No stage, no spotlight, just silence. Yet the grief that followed was deafening. The world of music mourned, knowing it had lost not just a DJ, but a pioneer who gave us more than sound. He gave us freedom, joy, and a rhythm that will echo in every beat of house music for generations to come. Marlon Riggs, the fearless voice who refused to be silenced. Marlon Riggs wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a warrior armed with camera, a black queer visionary who dared confront the world's silence with truth. At a time when HIV was spoken of in whispers, wrapped in fear and stigma, Riggs stood before the world and declared his reality. He was living with the virus. That kind of honesty was revolutionary. His films, raw, poetic, and unflinching, became a lifeline for those whom society tried to erase. Even as AIDS tore through his body, Riggs refused to surrender. Weakness gripped his flesh, but his spirit never faltered. He kept creating, kept challenging, kept fighting, determined that illness would never silence his voice. In his final days, racked with pain, his fire still burned. And when his body gave out on April 5th, 1994, the world lost a man but gained an eternal echo. Every frame he left behind still speaks, still challenges, still tells the truth he carried to the very end. Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey's final moments were spent in the stillness of a hospital room, his breath fading, his once powerful body reduced to frailty as the century's deadliest plague crept in to claim him. To the world, he was a revolutionary, a man who redefined modern dance and carved out a space where the black experience could move, speak, and soar through choreography steeped in both suffering and hope. But away from the spotlight, a far darker truth was closing in. By late 1989, the vibrant genius who had once commanded stages around the globe was now bedridden in New York, his body wasting away. There were no headlines, no interviews. Only doctors and nurses saw the agony etched in his face, the ghostly pallor of a man trapped in relentless decline. Alvin Ailey was fighting AIDS, a silent war raging across the queer community, shrouded in stigma, secrecy, and shame. His family, desperate to shield him from society's cruelty, told the world he had died of a blood disorder. It was a lie of love, meant to protect his dignity, but whispers backstage told a real story. Among friends and dancers, the truth passed quietly, like an unspoken rhythm echoing to the company he had built. Then came December 1st, 1989, World AIDS Day. On the very day meant to shine a light on the epidemic, Alvin Ailey slipped away. The timing was cruel, yet hauntingly poetic. One of the brightest stars of American art was extinguished by the very crisis the world was only beginning to confront. Willie Ninja, the ballroom legend who died alone in silence. Willie Ninja wasn't just a dancer. He was a revolution in motion. The godfather of voguing. He carried Harlem's underground ballroom culture onto the global stage, dazzling the world from New York to Paris. His body was language. His walk was power. His every movement a declaration of pride for those the world refused to see. But on September 2nd, 2006, in a quiet New York hospital room, the applause was gone. No cameras, no runway, no music, only silence as Willie took his final breath. Alone. AIDS! The merciless plague that haunted a generation had stripped him piece by piece. From the late 90s, his brilliance was dimming, but he never let the world see the pain. He stood tall, shoulders back, stride fierce, even as his body betrayed him. Beneath the spotlight, he was untouchable. Behind closed doors, he was withering away. Skin clung to bone, eyes once alive with fire dulled by exhaustion. The same world that had cheered him turned its back. The spotlight faded. The legend who redefined dance lay bettered and voiceless, trapped in the very body that once carved poetry out of thin air. And so, he left this world not with a thunder of applause, but with a whisper. No family gathered at his side. No final words exchanged. Just a haunting question echoing into history. How could a man who gave so much brilliance, so much beauty, so much truth, be left to die in silence? Willie Smith, the visionary who redefined fashion, but lost the battle too soon. He wasn't just a designer. He was a cultural earthquake. In the 1980s, when New York streets pulsed with hip-hop beats and R&B rhythm, Willie Smith stepped in and changed fashion forever. With his trailblazing brand Willie Wear, he tore down the walls between high fashion and street culture. His clothes weren't just stitched fabric. They were identity, rebellion, and freedom. Artists wore him. Dreamers wore him. Everyday people wore him. He gave a generation style, and in return, they gave him immortality. But just as his star burned brightest, the unthinkable happened. On April 17, 1987, news broke. Willie Smith was gone. Only 39 years old. No cause revealed. Just silence. Behind that silence was a hidden war. Years earlier, on a trip to India, Willie had stepped on a discarded needle. What no one knew then was that the needle carried HIV. Quietly, the virus spread. Quietly, it waited. And then, in his prime, it came roaring back. He grew thinner, weaker, his body wasting away. He coughed through sleepless nights, yet refused to surrender. Willie kept designing feverishly, as if sketching one more collection could prove he was still in control. But the disease had other plans. His immune system collapsed, tuberculosis gripped him, and in those final days he lay in a cold New York hospital room. Hooked to oxygen, his once radiant body shrunk to under 88 pounds. No flashing cameras. No roaring crowds. Only the beep of hospital monitors and the suffocating silence of a life too brilliant, too brief. Willie Smith died alone. But his legacy? It refuses to die. His vision still blazes in every streetwear designer who dares to mix art with rebellion. His name still whispers in the fabric of culture. Bold, unforgettable, tragic. And Willie's story is just one. Behind the glamour, behind the applause, lies a hidden chapter. Stories of 23 R&B and fashion legends stolen by AIDS. Their voices silenced. Their dreams unfinished. Their warnings never spoken. Which story cuts deepest for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to uncover the hidden truths behind the stars you thought you knew, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because these are the stories Hollywood tried to bury.